Hello chess fans, this is Rick from Chess to Progress with number 8 in the series Endgames. This one was a request from a very faithful viewer, Gil Rowley from the US. He asked, can you do a video on Awonder Liang's win in the US Championships? Awonder Liang has just turned 15 years old. He is the 11th youngest grandmaster in history and the second youngest US grandmaster in history behind Samuel Zviad. And he played in the senior US championships for the first time in 2018. He did very well. He drew his games against the three giants of US chess, Fabiano Caruana, Wesley So and Hikaru Nakamura. And he won a game. He won a game in round 10, the penultimate round, on the 28th of April 2018 against Zviad Izoria. And Gil asked me to do a video on it. Well, the game is 67 moves long, and I am trying to do videos on shorter games not that long. So I said to Gil, would it be okay if I do a video on the endgame, because the endgame is quite interesting, and Gil was happy with that. So let's look at the endgame. We see both players playing the endgame here on the board. Awonder Liang is the boy on the left, and Zviad Izoria, you can see him there on the right. Let's go into the endgame of that encounter. And the reason Gil asked me to do a video on Awonder Liang is because Awonder Liang is from the same area as where Gil lives. Let's have a look. Awonder Liang is white and Zviad Izoria is black. And this is a winning endgame for white. You can see the position. What strikes the eye is all those pawns that white still has. Yes, he's an exchange down. Black has a rook for a bishop, but white still has 7 of his 8 pawns that he started the game with, and we're on move 45, and black only has 3. So Liang has 4 pawns for the exchange, and that's enough to win. But there are some interesting aspects and very instructive aspects to this endgame. Let's have a look at it. C takes d5 was played, taking a rook there. Now the rook on c6 is hanging, and Izoria played his rook to g6. Attacks the unprotected pawn on g5, and black is hoping for counterplay with this pawn. Looks a bit dangerous for white. Here Liang took some time, played king e4, good move, and if you now take that pawn, and you might want to do that because then you cut off the king from the g file, and then your h pawn will get very strong. But let's look at the variation. It wasn't played. King takes f4 is then a move, attacking the rook, and if the rook drops back, then white is very quick with his central pawns. e6, you have to run with your counterplay pawn, the h pawn, d6, h3, and then bishop a5 check wins for white. Yes, the black pawn is almost there, but he doesn't have time. Let's look at the variation. King e8, d7 check, king e7, and you promote. You have to give your rook for the queen. Bishop takes, check, king takes, and then the king, the white king, is in time to stop the runaway pawn on h3, and this is an easily winning king and pawn endgame. So after king e4, Izoria saw all that, did not take the pawn. He started to push the h-pawn straight away. Liang took the pawn, and now h3, but the big difference is here that the white king is not cut off on the g file, because we still have that pawn on g5 to hide behind. So king g3 was played, and now rook takes g5 check, but white just cleaned up that h3 pawn. And now is 5 pawns up, 5 pawns for the exchange. But it's still not easy. Okay, 1 pawn disappears straight away, rook takes e5, d6 to make sure we don't lose that pawn. And there was a reason that white did not play c3, c4 to protect the d5 pawn. There is a trick in the position which we'll see later. Rook e2 was played, attacking the f-pawn now. And I followed this game in the live broadcast with Grandmasters Sarah Won and Ashley and Woman Grandmaster Jennifer Shahade, and they said king g3 is the move here. But Liang played king g2. Why did he do that? Liang was asked about this in the press conference after the game, and he started to explain why he played king g2, but he didn't really get that far because they were looking at this variation. King d7 was played in the game, and f4 was played, and now Izoria played king e6. But there was a nice, and this is very instructive, defensive mechanism in the game, which Grandmaster Ashley showed. What black can play here is rook e8, go back with that rook. And if you then play the very logical king f3, then there is rook f8. And white has trouble playing his f-pawn up the board, as it's only on the 4th rank. If it was on the 5th rank, then it would be a lot easier. But on the 4th rank, it's not easy. That pawn cannot advance. Let's have a look. If you play king e4, then there is rook e8 check. And if you then play king f5, there is another check. King g5, rook g8 check. The rook just keeps checking the king. The king will have to go back to f3, and then the rook will go to f8 again. And we have that same position. White is not able to advance his f-pawn. This is a good one to remember. Rook and pawn endgames happen a lot in chess, and this maneuver is good to remember. The rook going back to his own back rank when the opponent's pawn is on the 4th rank. In this particular position, white is still winning. If we go back a few moves after king e4 and then rook e8, white can play king d5, and after rook f8 he might just want to give up on these pawns and walk his king over to pick up the a-pawn and then start running with his own a-pawn. So he's still winning. But it's an interesting defensive maneuver that black didn't see, Izoria didn't see it, and also Liang explained in his interview after the game that he had missed this maneuver, which was after king d7, f4, to play rook e8. And as said, white has trouble pushing his f-pawn further up the board because of the rook on the back rank. But king e6 was played instead, and now that trick is no longer possible. There's one more thing I have to show you. I already mentioned that playing up the c-pawn is dangerous, so let's go back. Let's say f4 was played here, and again we play rook e8 with a defensive maneuver to keep the f-pawn under control. If then king f3 is played and rook f8, we already saw that, then we can also try c4. But then black has another very instructive move here. Rook b8, and suddenly there is counterplay, because now black's threat is to take the bishop. Because if you take back, then the a-pawn will start running, and before you know, black will win this game of chess. So you have to be careful in pushing the c-pawn, and that is something that Liang also had seen because he mentioned it a few times in the analysis after the game. Another instructive thing to remember. Okay, we're going back to the game. King e6 was played, and now the grandmasters in the studio were saying we're going to play king f3 here, but no, Liang played king g3, and the grandmasters in the studio were puzzled. It doesn't throw away the win, but why not go to f3 to tickle the rook, as Sarah called it. King g3, rook e1 was played, and now king f3, rook c1, king e2. What's very important in endgames is to activate all your pieces, also the king. The king has to play, and here Awonder Liang activates his king. He could have gone forward, he could have gone to e4, but he chose a different route. And that's another important thing in endgames. Do not rush, and that's very instructive from this endgame. Awonder Liang took his time, he did not rush, and that is a good thing to remember. Rook c2 check, king e3, rook c1, king d2, and the rook has to move away from the central files. Rook h1, and now a nice move, f5 check. Can you not take that pawn? No, you cannot. Because of d7, you have to hurry back with the rook to control the pawn, and then bishop e7 wins. controlling the d8 square and winning the rook. King e6, white queens, rook takes, bishop takes, and this is an easily winning endgame for white. So after f5 check, king d7 was played by Izoria, king e3 and rook h4 to cut off the king, and here again the grandmasters were shouting for f4 to make sure that the king is no longer cut off, and then you can come in with your king. But Liang played f3. And after king d8, then he went to f4. Both players didn't have much time. They were playing mostly on the increment of 30 seconds a move, so not all the best moves were played, but again it's very important to see, and very instructive to see, that Awonder Liang did not rush. He knew he had a winning position and he went about it very cautiously without giving away the win. Rook h1, king d4, king back to d7, f6, the pawns are advancing, king e6, king c5, and if you now take on f6, then there is again d7, rook has to go behind the pawn, king c6, king e6, and this is a very nice move, f5 check, diverting the king. The king cannot go to e7 and has to let go of the d7 pawn. King e5, king c7, and white will queen on the next move. Back to the game. After king c5, king d7 was played. The black king has to keep the white king out. King d5, rook check, king e4, king e6, and now the last move of the game, f7. Nice final move from Awonder Liang. Black resigned here. Why did he resign? If you take that pawn, then there is d7, and again you have to go back with the rook. The king cannot go there to control the pawn because of the bishop. So rook h8 is the only move. Bishop a5 to control the promotion square. King e7. We're promoting anyway. Take, take, take. And this is a simply winning king and pawn endgame. Very nice win from 15-year-old. He only had just turned 15 earlier that month, from Awonder Liang, the 11th youngest grandmaster in the world. So you may want to remember that instructive maneuver. If your opponent's pawn is on the 4th rank, you have a defensive mechanism with putting your own rook in a rook and pawn endgame on the back rank, and then your opponent will have trouble in advancing that pawn. Also, it's important to know that you should not rush in endgames. Take your time, and this was a very good example of that, and make sure that all your pieces play. White had long king maneuvers to make sure his king was as active as possible, supporting the pawns moving up the board. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and please subscribe to the Chess to Progress channel. Please leave a comment, and if you liked the video, it would be great if you could share it on social media. You also may want to check out my Chess to Impress channel. The link is in the description box. This is Rick for Chess to Progress. Thank you for watching.